broadcasting. I think that's, if you just simply want to cross and switch off analog, but then to do that, you will have to make the sacrifice of like millions of homes across the country will not be able to have television.
Is that why we have not crossed? Is it that the NBC is bothered about leaving out some people, and that's why we've not crossed?
That's part of it, yes. I mean, for us as a regulatory organization, we have to look at the larger interest of the consumer. Now, in a market, we have about 20% digital penetration at the moment. That is number of, within the TV household, number of people who currently have access to digital television. Through the NTA Star, your Details Go TV, your DSTV, all those things are calculated as digital because they're already on a digital platform. So the larger 80% of our population don't have access to this digital free-to-air service. And most of these services are paid television subscription services. And so our calculation is that essentially if we were to switch off analog, if we switched off Channels TV, if we had switched off Channels TV on Wednesday, it would have meant that 80% of the population, if we're just using that benchmark, will not have access to television anymore. The advertising, you kill advertising instantly because where are the eyeballs? You kill local programming because now there's no incentive to produce because no one is watching. So those are some of the factors that we looked at and said we will not recommend. And in any case, the set-top boxes are not available. So even though we have most of Lagos is covered by digital transmission infrastructure by these companies that I've mentioned, but the reality is they are concerned with their pay television business. They're not really, our concern is the larger population. We need to make sure that the large majority of Nigerians have access to television on an ongoing basis. Because given the situation our country is in, imagine you suddenly wake up, there's no television. And we don't want that to happen.
Okay, let's look at individual broadcast stations.
Yeah.
How have the stations been able to move from, in terms of their equipment, move from analog to digital? I know, of course, channels, we are already digitalized.
Yes, you are. I'll say that we conducted a readiness audit last year. We're doing another one at the moment, just to see how stations are, how ready stations are. There are two legs to it, to the story. I mean, there's the internal capacity within the station itself. Your from your studio set to your master control to all the way towards your transmission end. Most of the stations will say they're ready. Most of the stations are ready in terms of the studio infrastructure. Where the challenge is where you evacuate the signals at the back end. That's where we have a challenge because the signals have to travel from the studio to a head end. And that infrastructure will have to be built, whether it's going to be by microwave, whether it's going to be by fiber, or whether it's going to be by satellite. That infrastructure will have to be put in place. Yeah.
So would you say that most of these stations already have that back end?
That's not, that back end is not ready at the moment.
Okay. Now, Yemi asked a question about how far we've gone. You said some of the things that hindered our movement were funding and the laws.
Yeah.
So how far would you say we've gone in terms of, let's look at the laws, for instance. Yeah. How far?
Well, we do have, we're fortunate to some extent that the NBC Act and indeed the Nigeria Broadcasting Code is very agnostic. That is, it's not an analog or is it a digital. In fact, it recognizes, if you go to the Broadcasting Code, it recognizes some of the kinds of categories of broadcast digital. We cover the direct broadcast satellite. We cover some of these issues. Where the challenge has been is in terms of the legacy stations, especially your NTA, which is set up by statute. Some of the state TV stations also set up by statute in those states, and how we deal with them. So we're changing the NBC Act. We're going to review that. The first draft has been put forward by DigiTeam, which is headed by Engineer Mana. We're going to make that public very soon, so that members of the public and will be able to put give their input before we conclude work on that. We couldn't do that with the last National Assembly, but certainly we're hopeful that within the shortest possible time.
Now, 1 second.
Okay.
When we talk about this digital thing, we still have the age. This is like the age of the new media.
Yeah.
So how is that going to tie in? There are those who believe that live streaming on all platforms, like Ikomosa says, live streaming on mobile platforms is the future. Investment in digital component has a weak business case. How would that play out?
You know, I suppose the person who's commenting has said something which is true and not so true. You know, this is your station. We're having this broadcast. This broadcast is going out to millions of people and is on satellite. This broadcast is you're streaming it.
Yeah.
So you cannot, you have to first set up the infrastructure of a television station with the cameras if you want to run it professionally. So that's an investment which you have to do. If you stream, people do streaming, but it's an ancillary. In the future, I mean, the traditional ways of doing distribution, you either do through your traditional broadcast spectrum. A lot of other people will decide to do using broadband infrastructure, IPTV, over-the-top television. Those are ancillary services. In our market, you know, the reality is today that 90+% of the people receive television via traditional means, over the Hertzian frequencies, your UHF, your VHF. That's how people receive television. And so you have to cater for that. Whilst you're planning and thinking for the future is already here. It's happening. You're on YouTube. You're on. You know, people are getting your services. But the primary thing is that if you switched off your primary distribution mode on free-to-air television, that business may not be. The other end of the streaming business may not in itself be sustainable, because the advertisers who sustain you will say, you know, how many people are seeing you, and so. But that's the business of the future. And so I agree with him. But the reality now is that we have to deal with